Hey, so I made a post on TikTok the other day where I was discussing an experience I had. And one of my friends said, have you talked about this on Patreon? And I said, no, I haven't posted on there since my introduction post. So I figured I would do that today. Just to talk on it like a little bit more, because I agree with her. I think it is an interesting and important conversation for us to have as white women. So yeah, let's get into it. So I was doing an exercise from the anti-racism activity workbook, which I do have linked in my link tree. Under the shop feature if you wanted to get it. I love it. It's been super helpful and great. But one of the exercises, they asked the question, when did you first realize you were white? And it really got to me because I was like, when did I first realize that I was white? So after thinking on that for a while, I could only think of one experience that was the first time. And obviously, I don't think it's when I probably realized it sometime when I was a kid. Usually that's when at some point, little kids in their developmental stage truly don't, they see color, but they don't see it as any different. And then at some age, pretty young, society teaches us. If our parents and people around us don't, society will show us. And that's when I think the tenets of white supremacy really start to show themselves. But for me, I remembered that my experience was when I was in nursing school, and I was in my practicum. It was my junior year, and everyone was assigned a group of patients. Like basically you were the nurse, but you had a preceptor that would watch over you and make sure you didn't like mess things up. And I was assigned a patient, one of my patients, and she was a Black woman. And this floor that I was on was a step-down unit for bariatric surgery. So it was patients, many of whom had undergone bariatric surgery. Not all of them. Some of them were other GI surgeries, but yeah, it was a step-down unit for that. And so I was assigned one of my patients, which was this Black woman, and she had been very, very sick, like nauseous, sick to her stomach. And that's very common after bariatric surgery. If any of y'all have gone through it, your stomach is essentially shrunk, without getting technical about the procedure. But, and so if you eat or drink anything, it has to be out of a medicine cup, like a very small medicine cup. And that's all you're allowed to eat or drink at a time. And you can't eat and drink together. You have to do like a medicine cup of like the liquid food item, medicine cup of water, like everything. But she was super nauseous and she had been feeling terrible. And I think that she had just gotten out of surgery. It was either early that morning or just the day prior. Like she was very fresh post-op. And the doctor and the resident were making their rounds. The doctor was a very white presenting man. And the resident was a white woman. I'm white. My preceptor was white. And they were making rounds, and during their rounds, we were in the room with the patient. So the doctor could give us verbal orders for any like medications or anything he decided to do. So my preceptor and I are in the room, and this woman starts telling him how horrible she's felt, and that she's been so nauseous and everything. And he says, well, have you gotten up to walk yet? Which is also very important. You have to like get things moving so that you don't get obstructions or ileus. There's a lot of important factors for getting up and walking. But she hadn't gotten up to walk because she felt like she was gonna vomit every time she moved. So obviously not ideal conditions to get up and walk. Like when I'm nauseous, I don't want to move. And so he proceeds to start berating her about not getting up to walk, and just like, in my opinion, raising his voice. Like I can't officially say he was yelling, but he was raising his voice and just shaming her for not getting up and walking. And I can't remember, and I really tried. I do not have a good memory. I didn't get the good memory form of autism I always joke about, but I can't remember if he said you can't be lazy or called her lazy, but it came off to me like he was calling her lazy. And it just really bothered me. And she started crying. Like, that's how intense he was, like, coming at her. And she started crying. And he eventually says, you know, and myself, the preceptor, and the resident were all just standing there. Like, we didn't really say anything. I think at one point my preceptor did say, oh yeah, we'll walk later on today. Like, was trying to just like get him off of the topic and say like, don't worry, like we'll get, you know, make sure she gets up and walks and we'll help her, whatever. But eventually he says he'll prescribe her nausea medicine, and then he leaves the room with the resident. And the preceptor and I left the room, and I was like, dang, is he always like that? And the preceptor was like, yeah, I've seen him do that before. And I was like, big yikes. So I went to go get the nausea medicine for the patient from the medication room, and pulled it from the Pyxis, went back to her room and to give her this medicine, which was like an IV nausea medicine. And she was still crying when I went back in, and I said, you know, like, I'm so sorry that happened. Like, he should not have talked to you like that. You know, I'm going to see about filing a report, or whatever. And she was still crying, and she said, you'll never know what it's like, but this is what we go through. And it really sunk in for me that, because at first I felt like this was so wrong. I was going through some chronic illness issues at the time as well, and was not being believed, was being talked down to by doctors, not taken seriously. And like my symptoms, my pain, like nothing was believed. Like I couldn't get anything for pain. And they were writing it off, saying that I was just anxious. It turns out I had gastroparesis, which I found out when I got a decent GI doctor like a year later. So there were reasons that I was going through this. Also, my celiac artery was compressed. Like, there was multiple things that this doctor figured out that they had just been saying was anxiety. And I do think, in hindsight, that anxiety contributed to my symptoms, but it wasn't causing them. Like, there were issues. And so when that happened, that interaction, I felt like I related to her in a way. But when she looked at me and said, you'll never understand what it's like, but this is what we go through, it really sunk in for me that both of us are women that probably won't be believed by medical staff, that won't be taken seriously, that will be discounted and dismissed, and our symptoms and pain will be minimized and like given the name of heretics or whatever it's called. But only one of us would have 3 white women standing in the room knowing that nobody's gonna do anything about it or say anything. Like, she was in her most vulnerable and felt like she had no support. So when I made my TikTok on this, I really condense the story as much as I could. I actually tried to make that video like 3 different times because I kept being way too wordy, and I had to like edit out a lot because, as we all can tell, when I tell a story, it goes in lots of directions. But when I made that video, at the end, I posed the question to other white women about who do you think you are? Are you, or who are you? Like, in this moment, and who do you choose to be? Are you the white resident that doesn't speak up, doesn't say anything because you want the doctor to still think highly of you, or you're afraid of also being berated or judged? Are you the white presenting doctor that actively shames people for feeling what they're feeling and discounts their entire experience and what they're going through, likely even judging them based on things like color? Are you the preceptor, the white preceptor who is, has tenure, so maybe should speak up and say something because you've worked with that doctor before, but you also, kind of like the resident, maybe are scared to or feel uncomfortable doing that, but it's at the expense of other people, other humans, people of color, and your fellow women? Or are you the white student who doesn't have any power in that scenario? You don't have any tenure. You're actually at the very bottom of the totem pole of the medical staff because you're still a student and you're reporting to someone. So very much being judged harshly. But you're recognizing the problem still. And still not saying anything. Despite not having power, you're not willing to put yourself on the line, but you want to because you're just now realizing how it all is and how it all works. And I said in this video, I don't know that that's the first time I realized that I was white, but I am almost certain it's the first time I realized my white privilege, because of this woman who told me, you'll never know what we go through. And my first inclination in my head was probably to think, I would never say, but was probably to think like, oh no, I've been through that too. I have chronic illness. Like, I understand. But I'm so glad that, well, first of all, in nursing school, you're taught never to talk about yourself, and a lot of nurses do, but you're not supposed to. Everything is supposed to be centered on the patient, and you're supposed to be their advocate, and what's best for them. And so I'm grateful for that in a way, but also I'm grateful that, like, at the least, that my mind was open enough to really think about this after she said it and sit with it, realize things, and learn from it. But that was the first experience that I had. And I think it's like so important to think about that. And I think that we should all be the students. Like, if nothing else, we should have that mindset. I follow Portia and subscribe to her Patreon, and she says, like, if you don't feel like you can say something, or you don't understand what it is you're supposed to do, then you're not ready yet. It's okay, we'll get there, but you're not ready yet. And I think about that too. Like, if you're not ready to be the person that speaks up, like to be the white resident or the preceptor, if you don't have any tenure and you barely know what you're doing or what you're talking about in the first place, that's okay. You'll get there. But we can at least be the student. So what I did in this situation, and this is not a hero moment, I just think it's a learning opportunity. But what I did in that situation was I filed a report on the doctor. And I told the patient I was going to do that. And I gave her nausea medicine, and then I helped her walk that day. And I said, we're going to prove him wrong. You're going to be the most active patient ever. And after she got the nausea medicine, she was fine. She walked that time with me, and we could tell that she was moving fine. She wasn't a fall risk. And so we kind of, approved for her to go walking by herself and with her partner. And she walked multiple times that day. And I just loved it for her. And we were able to discharge her the next day. She did fine. But it broke my heart that she was talked to like that. And, there really is a huge problem in the medical field as a whole with dismissing women's symptoms. And I think it is an important conversation that we should talk about more. But sometimes I think when we focus so much on that aspect, we forget that there are more marginalized people at risk. Black women are at risk for so many medical conditions. And one of the reasons they're at the highest risk is because they are not listened to, and in my opinion, are not advocated for by people that look like us. And that's a problem with us. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. But it starts with listening, in my opinion, and keeping our minds open to new ideas, new perspectives, and realizing we don't know everything. I think one of the most powerful things that we can say as white women is, I don't know, but I want to. And not about people's experiences necessarily. We can never understand fully and know. And White Woman Whisperer talks a lot about relating and the white person's need to relate. And it's so accurate. And I struggle with that too. I think it also is a neurodivergent thing. Because sometimes that is the way that I process what people are saying, is by relating certain things. But still, it's good to be mindful of, and her WAIT acronym, why am I talking? Just because in my head I might be relating certain things doesn't mean I need to comment on somebody's post and say, OMG, me too. Or in that case, when I was with the patient, I don't need to say, oh yeah, I've been going through a lot of chronic illness stuff too. When you put it into an example like that, you can see how much that would turn from you understanding what she's saying to you centering yourself and your own experience. So, yeah, those are some thoughts that I had after making that video. So if you end up watching this and seeing this, my friend that suggested that I do this video is currently my only subscriber, which, by the way, it's free to subscribe to me. I will offer all of my content on the free tier, so you don't have to pay anything. I will try to post more in the coming days. I'm recording a few today to make sure to do it, and I just hired someone to start coming to clean my house, and I think that is going to help a ton for me having more energy outside of work and things to do stuff I like to do, like this, and having the important conversations and not worrying so much about cleaning or keeping up with things, because honestly, responsibilities of life are very difficult for me. But living alone is rough. But back to what I was saying, if you're watching this and you're a white person, specifically a white woman, but a white person in general, I challenge you and myself and all of us on a daily basis, or even more frequently if needed, to think about which character are we choosing to be. And I don't mean that in a fake way, like we're playing a part, but sometimes it might be easier to look at it that way instead of seeing it as something is internally wrong with me, but instead broadening the base, if that makes sense. In my mind, I have a vision, but sometimes I can't think of the words to describe the vision I'm having. Anyways, so I challenge us to think about which person we are. Like some days I think could be different than others. Like some days or some topics or some situations I might need to be the student, despite how long I've been having these conversations. Like sometimes it is not time for me to speak about anything, or it's not the topic, or I know nothing about the topic. And I think that's difficult for us that are white to get around. And that is white supremacy. And that is like the tenets combined. Like it's not all about us, and we don't belong everywhere. We don't deserve to be everywhere, if I'm being honest. I mean, we are consistently causing harm. And so I think realizing that is very important. But then on other days or other topics or other times, it might be the time for us to be the white resident that's working hand in hand with someone. And I think in those instances, it's like if it's a family member of ours or a friend, somebody that we are working closely with, and they say something and we're like, that's problematic. And like we can do it gently in a way where we're recognizing that we have also been that person before. Like we have been that doctor before. But then also recognizing when we have the knowledge, like when we know better, we do better, to say, you know, using the analogy of this situation, to say like, well, I think like if it's appropriate, and I'm talking about when we are talking to white people, not people of color, okay? Don't forget that. Very important. But when we're talking to other white people and we have a friend or a family member that says something, for us to say like, what? I think actually that's not accurate. They're not lazy at all. They've just been nauseous. Like, how hard is that to do? And, you know, putting that into practice, that could be us, you know, if they say something like, I don't see color, and us saying like, actually, that's really interesting. You know, I've recently come to realize that that's actually more harmful than helpful, because it dismisses like the very real harm that's caused and struggles that people face. Yeah, so there could be those situations where we can step in when we're talking to each other, and that we might be at different places at different times. And also depending on the topic. You know, if it's a complete stranger and they're just spewing hatred, you can't humanize people that aren't acting human, you know? And I recently learned that because I used to really, I think, believe the best in people and believe that if people knew better, that they would do better. I even made a Facebook post, like on my personal Facebook, like a long time ago during COVID, where I explained like all of the things about the disease and how vaccines work. And I ended the post with saying, usually if we are against something or fighting something, it's because we don't understand. And so I thought if I explained it, maybe you'll understand too. And that's just not accurate. Like, that's not the case. Like, people have to want to be immersed and learn and do better to do better. Like, that sounds so repetitive, but it's true. Yeah. And that's been a really hard one for me to grapple with and realize. So, yeah, it's if people want to know. But I do share these things with my family and friends, and I don't push it. Like, I'm not calling them up like, hey, have you started doing the anti-racism work today? Like, I don't do that. But I do bring up these things, and I let them know, and I let them watch some of my videos so that when they are ready, if they're not ready to like actively get immersed and learn from people of color, maybe they'll contact me and they'll say, hey, what do you recommend? Like, maybe they'll feel comfortable enough because I'm their friend or family member. Maybe they'll feel comfortable enough with me as a white person to ask me for recommendations. And I can say, yes, I got you. You should follow all of these people, buy these books, get a journal, get little tab thingies, like do all the things. And then, yeah. And that's, to be honest, if anyone, this is very off topic. I'm sorry, my brain is weird. But that is the ultimate goal, I think. Like, obviously, I don't have many followers even on TikTok. Like, I'm a little bitty person, small creator. And I still get like a little kid when people follow me. Like when White Woman Whisperer followed me back. I almost cried. Because I like have been learning from these people. So that would be like, you know, if Obama followed me. Like, in my eyes, like, I don't know, that's a weird example. But anyways, you know what I'm saying? Like, I appreciate so much. But the ultimate goal, despite my small following, the ultimate goal of any of my pages anywhere and talking about these things is not in hopes that, like, I get huge. I think that actually sounds like my worst nightmare. To, like, even going, I've never gone viral, and I feel like it would most likely be pretty overwhelming. And I understand that there's the possibility that that could happen. But my ultimate goal for my pages is not to go to get big, but in hopes that people that aren't able to see outside of themselves yet and still are very much ingrained in racism and white supremacy beliefs, maybe they would listen to me, somebody that looks like me, and then can get pointed in the right direction. So I guess my ultimate goal would be that I actually gain followers, but then at some point that those people stop following me and follow the people that they should be listening to and should have been listening to all along. Unless they're my friends, then you can still follow me because I care, even if we're just like internet friends. But yeah, that kind of got off on a tangent. But yeah, I challenge you to think about and share here or in the chats, like, which person are you today? Or which person do you identify with at this point in your life from my scenario? Because I was the student. Now I'm speaking up a little bit more. I wouldn't say I have tenure, but I think we can all do better.